Hey friends, well, we've wrapped up another year and we've come to the end of 2023, looking forward to 2024. It's been quite a ride. Now, as far as the channel is concerned, I think we've done very well. I've certainly enjoyed making a lot of videos this last year, and I've been impressed and pleased that so many people have enjoyed watching them. The subscribers have increased by 1,700 something, and we're now just over 3,500 subscribers as we enter the new year. And I'm grateful for that. I'm especially grateful for all of the interaction and all of the positive, kind comments that have come in, and all the people who have been thankful, saying that they appreciate the videos and that it's helped them solve a problem or an issue, or at least they were entertained. And so I hope in the upcoming year I'm able to continue to produce more content and have the channel grow. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And 2024 promises to be an exciting year, and I think that the trajectory of 2023 will continue into the next year. Now, one of the things about being old is that you get to reflect on the decades of your life. And you can look back over the years and see the changes. And as I look back and contemplate the 1960s, the 1970s, 80s, the 90s, well, I would say it was a better time. It was a time of more hope for the future, and things seemed a bit more rational. Now, certainly, in all of those eras, there were definitely challenges. Remember the oil embargo of the 70s and lines at gas stations, and that was a big concern. I remember disco, and I thought it was horrible. It was horrible. But these days I can look back at it with some nostalgia. But overall, there seemed to be optimism and hope for the future that seems a little less abundant these days. And so I want to take a step back and just give you my opinion as to what I see happening in our landscape of the world and what's really going on. We look at today's world and we have a president in the White House who I question if he could tie his own shoes. We see unprecedented levels of violence happening in our cities. We see inflation and the cost of goods getting excessive. We see supply chain issues where getting what you want might not be quite as easy as it used to be. And we see the quality of materials and products, in some cases, declining. But of course, we also see some positive things, such as technology that is readily available today that would be completely unobtainium back in the 70s. The desktop computer that I use now is magnitudes of processing power more powerful than the business computers that I used back in the 70s and 80s. It's quite impressive. But what is behind all of these shifts that we are seeing in our world? Well, President Bill Clinton, back when he was the president, had a placard on his desk that said, "It's the economy, stupid." And I think that that was very illuminating, which is so many of the things that we see happening are the result of some kind of economic forces. Who the country decides to go to war with, what sort of trade deals are implemented, and what products are elevated in the marketplace and which ones are not. It has a lot to do with the overarching economic forces. And I think we are seeing a period of severe economic instability, and this can have wide-ranging impact. Now, a lot of people talk about our economy, and when they say our economy, I take a little exception to that because it's not really our economy. It's not your economy. It's not my economy. I'm not in those big meetings making policy decisions. I'm not the one benefiting from the economic engine. We use the economy. It's a monopoly that we don't have much choice about. If we want to purchase goods or services or pay our taxes, we have to use that economy. But it's not our economy. And so whose economy is it? Well, it's a private company that owns the economy. You might think of the Federal Reserve and think, well, it's federal, so... But we also have Federal Signal and Federal Mogul and Federal Ammunition and Federal Express and the Federal Reserve. And these are all just private companies. Now, they might have some government regulation like all companies do, but they're private companies. And so the government doesn't tell the bankers how to run the economy. That's their own business. And the way that they've run the economy, it's created a crisis. And this crisis has been in the works for a long, long time. This particular economic system that we're using, the world is using, it's not really that old. You could say the Federal Reserve came into being the early part of the 1900s. And perhaps you could say that the economic forces behind it were in play a little bit before that. So for less than a couple hundred years, we've been heading down this track. And of course, the Federal Reserve is not the top of this pyramid. There's other banks that are probably even more important than the Federal Reserve, but they represent kind of the top tier in the United States. Now, to understand how we got into this pickle, we have to understand how the economic system works in a very general sort of way, very top-level sort of view. The question is, how does money get into the economy? And with our current banking system, it's a fiat currency, meaning that the bankers just create the money. They don't have to work for it. They don't do labor. They just create the money and put it into the economy. But there's, of course, a bunch of rules and regulations behind it. They can't just simply give themselves a whole bunch of money. If they did that, there'd be tremendous outrage. And so the way the system works is that money is created when bank loans are issued. And so how this process works is when an individual, a company, or the government goes to the bank and says, we'd like some money. We want a loan. The bank will then ask them for some collateral for that loan. If you want a loan to buy a house, the bank will probably say, well, why don't you give us the title to that house, which we will hold on to, and based on that, we will issue a loan. And so they will take in the title, they'll have an appraiser look at the home, and the appraiser will say, that home is worth $300,000. So therefore, we can give you a $300,000 loan. And they will take the value of that collateral that you've provided and put that on one side of their books, because they always have to keep their books in balance. Now, there might also be a signature loan where you come into the bank and say, hey, I'd like $15,000 to pursue something interesting. And the banker looks at your prior history and says, you're a very trustworthy individual. So if you just write us a note saying, I owe you $15,000, we can just take possession of that note and put that against our ledger. And we'll value that as if it's a real $15,000. So we can then give you a loan for $15,000. Or in the case of a government, they will perhaps take in U.S. Treasury bonds. And those bonds are simply a promise to pay at a future date. And so based upon the trustworthiness of the government, they will evaluate those treasury bonds as being real value, and they can put that against their ledger so they can issue a loan of equal value on the other side of the ledger. And so then the bank will issue a loan to the borrower and give you that cash. Now, the bank expects to get that cash back. They're not putting cash just into the economy. It's all a loan that the bank wants back eventually. And then there's the issue of how does the bank make money? Well, they make money through service payments for providing this loan service. And typically that's through interest payments. And so depending upon the amount that you loan and the time duration for which you want that loan, there's an interest that is charged, which is additional monies that are due to the bank in addition to the loan. And so this is how the system works. So when a person goes to the bank and asks for a loan, the bank isn't scraping together that money from other people's deposits. They're creating brand new money and putting it into the economy. And then eventually when that loan is paid off, that money goes back to the bank and actually disappears. And then the bank hands you the title that you had provided them as collateral back to you, and everything is squared up. Except for the interest payment, which is the additional amounts of money that the bank demands for providing the service, of course. And this is how the system has been working for the last 150 years or so. And the bankers have gotten themselves in an enviable position of having a monopoly on the money creation game. There's only one place where you can get legitimate money in the United States, and that's from the bank. That's the money that you can use to pay your taxes. Now, of course, there's nothing stopping us from using other forms of currency. Ithaca, New York had Ithaca Hours, and they had their own in-town currency that they managed. That's legal. You could purchase Bitcoin, and if you can find somebody who will accept Bitcoin as a payment, well, you can use that as a trading mechanism. You can, of course, also just barter. If you have a bunch of corn and another guy has some oats, well, you can swap back and forth. That's perfectly legal. But if you want to pay your taxes, you want to deal with most retailers, most people, well, you need U.S. currency, and that's the banker's currency. And it's only available from one place, and that is the banking system. Now, if you think about it for a little bit, I think even a child of 5 could tell you what the problem with this system is. Well, there's a couple problems. One is that the banks create this money out of nothing. They just simply put some numbers onto an Excel spreadsheet, and there it is. Money has been created. And so that means that most of us who don't have the privilege, we have to work for long hours in order to make some money. But the bankers, they can just put pen to paper and it's done. So that's not really a fair system. But the bigger issue is that the bankers don't give out that money. It's a loan. They expect to get it all back. And they expect to get an interest payment as well, which is additional monies back. But if they are the one source of money, and they've only issued out enough money for the loan, they've never issued out enough money to cover the interest payments. Well, that means that that extra amount of money to cover your interest payment has to come out of somebody else's loan. And it's a big game of musical chairs where eventually some people are going to end up without a chair when the music stops. Because there's always more debt in the system because of the interest payments than there is money to pay it off. And this is one of the reasons why the national debt can never be paid off, and it keeps escalating to greater and greater numbers. And we're now at $35 trillion of national debt. It's a completely ridiculous amount of money. And that's just the national debt. That's not unfunded liabilities. It's not the debt that you and I are carrying. All of this debt is insurmountable. And at some point, people are going to look at it and say, this is just not rational. It's too much debt. There's no way the world can pay it off no matter what we do. And what is all of this debt owed for? For some bookkeeping? I mean, what have these guys to whom all this debt is owed done to actually provide real value? And now they provide some value by running an economic system, for sure. But is that activity worth the amount of money that they think they should be paid? That's a big question that people will have. Now, because of this exploding debt, the banking industry, the people behind the banks, have gotten fabulously wealthy. And with that wealth comes power. And they've been able to have great influence on the direction of the world. And so, in essence, they have been able to enslave the entire world through money. And they rather enjoy that position, I am sure. But the problem is that the mathematics of the system means that there needs to be ever-increasing debt to keep that ball rolling. And the debt is getting untenable. And it's getting to the point where something's going to break. And this system will fail. And when the system was implemented 100, 150 years ago, the people who built the system knew that there was an end date mathematically in this system. At some point, it's going to break. And so they either need to just forgive the debt and do a reset and start over, or transition into something else. And there's a lot of consternation right now about what to transition into and how that's going to be managed. And their only power over the world really is through the power of money. And if the money is failing, well, that's a big concern. And so I think that we're seeing a lot of the mayhem and disorganization of the world and the reckless spending and the wars and conflict and strife. All of this stuff is the result of concerns over the stability of an economic system that's in its final stages. It's somewhat like the child who plays a game of Monopoly and who finds themselves in a losing position and would rather bang the board with their knee and throw all the pieces flying than accept the loss. Now, of course, the banking industry would like to transition to some other kind of system that has them in control. And they don't want to relinquish their control over the world, of course. And they're very powerful right now, so they're doing everything they can to try to transition to something else. But their choices are few. And one of their choices is basically dictatorial force. Now, the thing that works against them is that there's not too many of those folks, and there's billions of people. And so how that all plays out, we will see. But I think that 2024 should be an interesting year in the churning of the economic system and the next steps that it takes. Now, my personal suggestion would be that the current batch of people who have been running the world and running these economic systems, I don't think they've done a very good job of it. I think that they've been pretty greedy, and I think they've done very well, but I don't think that they've been very good stewards of humanity. And so whatever system we transition into past this one, well, I don't think that we should grant them the ability to run it. I think that they've had their time, and it's time that people with a little bit more integrity and a little bit more oriented towards humanity run the next system. So I think the next couple of years could be very interesting. If the current bunch of world power players have their way, it'll be a more controlled world with less freedoms for us all, less prosperity for us all, and probably not good for us, but very good for them. Or else humanity could rise up and say that they've had their time, they've been rewarded extremely well, and it's time for those guys to step aside and for a more fair and equitable system to come into place, and a whole new kind of economic system that more serves the people than the top 0.01%. So I think that there's an inflection point coming up, and we'll see which way the people want to go. There are billions of people and only thousands of oligarchs, so it should be interesting times. And I think if it was 1,000 years in the future and we had a time machine and we could spin that big wheel and go back in time to at any point in history, what would be an interesting time to live in? I think right now it'd be hard to beat. We've seen the rise of technology, the flourishing of the country, and now we're seeing a major systemic deconstruction of the economic system worldwide, unlike anything that's happened in prior history. It's an amazing time to be alive and an incredible story. So, however it goes down, it's going to be fascinating. And we'll see what 2024 brings. I suspect there'll be plenty to talk about. And so I hope that I'll be here for you in this channel to explore interesting things that happen, interesting things that we do, and the shared experience of the next year. So thanks for tuning in. I'm glad you're here. And if you enjoy the content, I hope you choose to subscribe. Hope you choose to thumb up the video if you're so inclined. And thanks a lot. We'll have another year together, I hope. And let's make it interesting.